Hey everyone, PSman coming at you, and hope this video finds you doing super well. Now, this video is going to be a tutorial on how to get started with SteamVR 2.0, as well as getting that integrated with VRTK 4.0. And we'll do a little bit of climbing just to show something that SteamVR doesn't provide by default, that you get for free by using VRTK. And I'll go over the ins and outs of that as we go through this tutorial, but main reason I'm doing this video is honestly because I was playing around with the knuckles and trying to get that to work, and honestly kind of found the onboard ramp to 2.0 a little confusing to use, and there aren't that many resources out there. I'll definitely make sure to leave any resources I found helpful in the description below, but that's the main reason I'm making this video. And if you do find it helpful, make sure to leave a like on this video. It really helps out the channel a ton, and consider subscribing if you are new to the channel. But with that out of the way, we can go ahead, jump into my laptop here, start up a brand new Unity project, and get started. Okay, so we've gone ahead, opened up a fresh Unity project here. You can see we're running 2019.2. This should work regardless of which Unity versions you're using, but if you're following along, that's what version we're using. And you can see it's a fresh Unity project. So for starters, let's go ahead, get SteamVR in. Now, in most scenarios, you can probably go ahead and get it off of the Unity Asset Store. However, in this current version, which is 2.5, I have noticed that for some reason, when you do it into a fresh Unity project, the hands do not track for whatever reason. So instead, what we're going to go ahead and do is go to the SteamVR Git page, and instead of 2.5, which is the latest at the time of recording, we're going to go ahead and get version 2.2. I do recommend that you try the latest version, just see if it works for you. If it does, cool, continue using that. If not, you can go ahead, check out 2.2, because that seems to be a pretty stable version. So here's 2.2, and if we scroll to the bottom, you'll see we have assets here, and you can get the Unity package. I've already gone ahead and downloaded that, so we can go ahead and import that into Unity. All right, so here's my download. Just drag that into your Unity project. Okay, once that's done, you'll see this Unity settings window here. Go ahead, accept everything. And once that's done, it'll say you made the right choice. Perfect. Now, we're gonna go ahead real quick and make sure that everything is working as intended. So go to your SteamVR folder, go to the interaction system, go to samples, and then click on the interaction example. And before we play the scene, go to your window here, go to SteamVR input. It'll say that you're missing an actions JSON. Go ahead, copy in the defaults, and you'll see that here. I'll talk a little bit more about what this is later, but for now, just go ahead, click save and generate. All right, once that's compiled, you can close that window and let's click run. Okay, so pretty much here, if you can see your hands and if everything is running in VR, you are good to go. You should be able to press the teleport here, and just to really quickly test this, go ahead, try to grab your longbow here, and if you can shoot this guy, everything's set. In order to get VRTK working, we're going to be using this scene, and I would encourage, if you've never played around with the interaction system, play around with this a little bit before we add VRTK, just to get a feel for what is currently available as features provided by SteamVR. But for now, let's go ahead, actually transition over to getting VRTK running into our project here. So if we head over to the GitHub for extended reality, you'll see that there are a bunch of different projects here. We're going to mainly be focusing on VRTK prefabs and Zinnia. And it's actually surprisingly simple in regards to setting this up. Literally, we go here, let's say we're trying to set up prefabs. We can go scroll down. You'll see this kind of short snippet of code here. We're literally just going to go ahead, copy paste this into our packages. In order to do that, let's just go click anywhere within Unity, go to show and explorer. From there, go to the root of your project and then click on packages, and you'll have this little manifest file. Double click that and open it up in pretty much any word editor. It really doesn't matter. Go back to GitHub, copy in the scope registries, and we'll just append that here to our file. Perfect. You can add that on a different line if you want. And just make sure the commas here and all the braces match. Should be good to go. Then let's go ahead, copy in this prefabs here. And one thing while we're here is notice the version number here. This might have changed at the time that you're watching this. So get that number and we'll use that right here. So go ahead, paste in prefabs. Make sure to add this comma here because otherwise it's not going to compile. And it was 115, so that's literally what we have to do to replace XYZ here. So make sure that those version numbers match. Next, we have to do the same exact thing for Zinnia. So again, scroll all the way down here, make sure you find this. We don't have to copy the scope registries again, we just need to copy this dependency here. And at the same time, make sure you get the version. At this time of recording, it is 180. Copy paste that in. This is 180, and you can get rid of that comma because it's at the end of our list. Go ahead, make sure you save the file, close this, open into Unity, and now the package manager will start running and downloading everything that you need to get VRTK working. Okay, so once that's gone ahead imported under your packages, you'll see both VRTK prefabs as well as Zinnia. That'll just me double check to make sure that everything is working correctly. Before we go ahead and add climbing to this interaction example scene here, I do want to make a note that most of the steps that we're going to be doing come from the how-to guides that are part of the VRTK Academy. Specifically, what we'll be taking a look at is the camera rigs, actions, and interactions. And as such, because these are pretty well documented here, I'm just going to quickly walk through these processes and more explain rather than walk through how everything is done. And if you want any more details, I'll definitely make sure to point out where we're using these specific tutorials so that you can dive into each of these links in more detail. First up is the camera rig section. So what we need to do is get the SteamVR interaction player prefab to start sending data over to VRTK. The way this is done is through the VRTK prefabs. We go to camera rig, tracked alias, drag this guy into the scene here. And now let me cut to once I get this set up real quick. For this camera rig, what we've gone ahead and done is set up a linked alias association collection, which is provided to us by VRTK. This allows us to send the head, left controller, and right controller position data, as well as velocities, which you'll get to in a second, over to our tracked alias here. And I've gone ahead also here added a note that this is the linked alias association that this alias needs to pay attention to. And we've just added that for the headset camera, left and right controllers. These are all again provided by the player prefab, so really straightforward there. One thing to note is I'm going to actually be ignoring the play area. Traditionally, you could technically go ahead and drag the player into here to represent the play area, but I did notice an issue when we went to climbing that it ended up breaking the interaction system. So at least at the time of recording, you can go ahead and leave that empty. Honestly, it really doesn't matter for what we're doing right now, but just wanted to make a note of that. So next up, you see that we have these velocity trackers. Those are pretty important when we're going into climbing. Obviously, we need the velocities to be kept track of so that we can pull ourselves up and down, left and right. So we need to actually go ahead and write a custom script for that. Again, that's the next step in the camera rig section of the tutorial. For that, let me go ahead, create a folder here. We'll call this VRTK, and this is where we're going to create our custom script. And we'll go ahead, create a C# script. We'll call this Steam Velocity. And let me pre-populate this here and I'll explain what's going on. If you've gone ahead, opened it up, you'll have an empty C# script that's that has all the defaults. I've gone ahead here, copy pasted in a short velocity tracker, and this is what we'll need to predefine how velocity data is sent over to VRTK. So you'll see here we are using Zinnia and we're using the Valve interaction system. We're going to have a public reference to a tracked object. Now this tracked object will assign in editor to be the left or the right hand so that we can get the left or right velocity respectively. And from there, we have two functions here that we need to override from the velocity tracker, because the velocity tracker is going to be something that is kind of generalized so that VRTK can get the data across a variety of different headsets and APIs. So for that, quite frankly, for angular velocity and velocity, it's really similar. We just get the hand, and then on that hand, Valve has provided us two functions to get the velocity and angular velocity. So very simple here. And once we have this script, and you can go ahead and copy that over, let's head over to Unity. Once Unity has compiled everything, let's go ahead and drag our Steam velocity script onto both our left and right hand here. And then all we need to do is for the right hand, just assign the right hand C# script. For the left hand, go ahead, assign the left hand here. And then make sure to go ahead, assign your velocity trackers to both of those. All right, so we assign left and right controller velocity here. I'm gonna ignore the headset velocity for now. If you want, you can go ahead and do that, but it's really not necessary for us. And with that, we've pretty much set up our camera rig to send that data over to SteamVR. And we pretty much don't have to deal with the player prefab anymore. All right, next thing we have to do is the second tutorial from the Academy, and that's going to be how to create actions. And again, for this, we're going to need to basically create a custom action that takes input from SteamVR and passes that into a Boolean action that we can use as a very simple way to represent when a trigger is pressed or not on a controller. So again, what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'll just pre-populate everything here for the actions. And if you have any more questions, please go check out that how-to guide. So for this, really what we need is a C# script that we're gonna call Steam input map. And what this does, it'll map the Steam input onto VRTK. So let me go ahead, pre-populate that right now. Okay, so here is the code. Again, very simple, but there's some things that I'm gonna explain in a lot more detail. So the way this works is we have a SteamVR action. So for example, if you're familiar with kind of the way Unity handles input, you provide actions like I want to fire or I want to jump, etc., etc. And that is captured as a string that we can go ahead and use to get that those specific data values. We also, again, just like the velocity, we have access to a hand. And moreover, we're also going to keep this private Boolean here just as a reference to our button. You don't really need to do this, just more for simplicity's sakes. On start here, we'll go ahead, get that action, which is specifically, for example, if we're calling fire, we will go ahead, get the fire action, save that to our button. And for the purposes of VRTK, which is just handled through what is called a Boolean action, which basically is a representation of whether or not an input is true or false. Very surprisingly simple. Again, more details on that are in the actions how-to guide, but that's what the Boolean action in a nutshell represents. And we just need to send that Boolean action the data. So specifically, we have to call this receive function, which we'll do on every update loop. And we'll just get the state from SteamVR. We pass in which hand we should be aware of, so whether that's the left or the right hand, and then that gets sent over to VRTK. So that is everything that's happening here. Now, let me quickly talk about how, again, SteamVR actions are represented. So this is the SteamVR input window. We touched on this really briefly at the beginning of the tutorial, but this is just a representation of a bunch of different actions that we can use within our game. And you can predefine as many or as few as you want. So we can create an action here. If you want, call it test. I would honestly recommend giving it a really good name. And the reason for that is because these actions are mappable to specific controller inputs, and they're mappable by any user. So you're not saying trigger at 75% should cause some action customly in my code. You're just calling this test action, if you will. That could be on the trigger, it could be on the grip, it really doesn't matter. All you know is it's going to be a Boolean value that you're given, and any user can map that however they want. And really the way you do this is you go to Open Binding UI here. Now, for whatever reason, I should note at the time of recording, my local host is not able to connect to it for some reason, but I'll show a screenshot of what it should actually look like, which is just UI for whatever controller you're using, and that UI just you can quickly easily map to specific controller inputs. And at least how it's set up by default is if we go back to Unity, the interact UI is tied to the trigger, and it's just a Boolean of whether it is pressed or whether it isn't pressed. So we can use interact UI here as our string kind of key action for the trigger. Again, this is purely for test purposes. Obviously, you would need to tie this to whatever actual development application you're building. But just to test things out, we'll use Interact UI as our action that we want to trigger certain events. So to set that up, since we have our input map here, let's go ahead, create an empty object. We'll drag over our input map. And there are a bunch of different states here if you want any other code to talk to VRTK, but we don't really need that. And for our action, again, that's going to be Interact UI. We'll also need to assign a hand here, so we'll assign the left hand. And let's go ahead and duplicate this for the right hand. Okay, so we have our left and right hand here. We can just quickly rename them. And that's very simply how to create VRTK actions. Once we have this, we are pretty much done with all the code, and now we can just quickly set up our interactors, which again, there's a how-to guide on that, as well as get climbing working. So for interactors here, what we need to go ahead and do is go back down to our prefabs, go to interactions, go to the interactors, and you'll see here we have a prefab for interactors. And let's go to our tracked alias, open that up. And under our left controller and right controller, let's go ahead, drag on both interactors. Now what an interactor is, very simply, is a way to let VRTK know that you want to interact with something. And that needs to know when to interact as well. So what we need to go ahead and do is, now that we've defined our Boolean actions, is on the left controller, let's go ahead say, when we pull down the left trigger, which we just defined, then grab. And same on the right controller here. Perfect. And we also need to set up our velocity tracker that happens to be defined by the alias because we're providing that data, so that's even more better. And that's pretty much it. Again, you can tweak some of the parameters here as far as when collisions happen and how they happen via physics, but for very simple purposes, this is more than enough. And if you want, you can go ahead and override the example avatar here, which is just the hand. So it's not going to be aligned exactly to the glove, but if you want it to be aligned to any specific model that you have, you can simply replace the colliders here or simply add your own model. It really doesn't matter. And the physics will basically be able to handle everything else in regards to when you want to grab specific objects. And at that point, it'll look a little something like this, a little bit cheesy. Obviously, we don't have anything to interact with in our scene, but we can go ahead anytime the interactor hits something that we'll add next, we'll be able to go ahead and climb, which is really, really awesome. And of course, last thing we're gonna add is climbing. So we can go to locomotion here. We're gonna go to movement and we're gonna go to climb. And this again is under the packages for the prefabs because everything here is beautifully attached to prefabs, which is awesome. Let's go ahead, drag climb into our scene, and let's go ahead also, you'll notice here we need a body representation. Let's go ahead, add the body representation here. Now, working our way back up, we need to define a body representation. We need to provide the play area. We didn't tie that to VRTK, but we can go ahead, just drag in the player here, which should be perfectly fine. And now on climb, let's go ahead, add in our body representation. So with that, climbing has been officially set up. And the last thing really we need to do is go ahead, add things that we can climb on. And for that, we can go to back to our interactions, back to our interactables, and then we can just drag a couple of these prefabs into our scene. And boom, we now have a scene that is enabled for our Steam interactions here. So we'll be able to teleport and everything, all of that good stuff. And we can also use VRTK to climb around things. So let me quickly position these cubes right here, and then we can try this out. And one thing I almost just forgot here is on all of these climbables, we need to provide a reference to the climb here. So you can just select everything here in the scene and then just send the climb. That just lets it know how it's getting the data via the climb. So with that said, we can go ahead, hit play, and give this a shot. Okay, so with that running here, you'll see your hands with the controllers telling you to teleport, but quite frankly, we're just gonna go ahead and climb. And if you're using the knuckles, you'll have all the finger data as well as the interactors that are sticking out. So all we really need to do is put the interactor here on our climbable objects and pull the trigger, and then we can move our hands. And it's as simple as that. we can move on to pretty much any of these. Now, I should note that there is no gravity or physics that's pulling me down, so even if you let go, that's not going to be the end of the world. But we have pretty much defined that exactly how we intended. And again, if I want to go ahead and teleport, I can go ahead and do that. We can grab the bow and arrow. We can still do everything that SteamVR wants us to do, but we now have the support of VRTK, and that's the climbable and all of that stuff is purely cross-platform. If you wanted to set that up for Oculus, you can do that. If you want to set it up for something completely different, you can do that. And that's just, I think, a very simple way of showing how you can get SteamVR to work, get all the benefits of any SDK that you're using while still reaping all the rewards that you get from VRTK. And I can't stress enough how awesome that truly is. So I hope you guys found this useful. Again, very simple. I mean, there's nothing super fancy and we hardly wrote any code whatsoever. But I think just walking through the basics here, I'm getting that set up, using some of the stuff from VRTK, using some of the stuff from the interaction system is all super valuable. We've talked a little bit about how to get the input from SteamVR, which again is super valuable. And I've tried to keep this as short as I can. If you have any more specific details, feel free to leave a comment below, ask any questions. I'll try to keep up to date with those as much as I can. And also you can check out the VRTK Academy for more details. I'll also go ahead and leave a couple SteamVR resources that might be helpful down in the comments below if you have any more questions specifically on what you can and can't do with the interaction system. But I think that pretty much does it. And again, if you did find this helpful, make sure to leave a like because that helps out the channel a ton and helps spread the word about these videos and the resources that we have here. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time. It's been FusedMan, and I'm signing out.